Fascinating time in Mexican history. We're about to enter into what could potentially be a very, very big change in the energy sector. We're looking at a possible opening of the sector to private investment, private participation. We're looking at a fundamental shake-up of the balance of power between the public and private sectors. The national oil company Pemex has been facing great problems for a number of years, and now it really looks as though we have an opportunity to fix the problems both of the national oil company, but more importantly of the sector in general. This, of course, raises all kinds of questions for the bilateral relationship. For many years, the United States has depended upon imports of petroleum from Mexico in order to satisfy its needs for energy independence. For energy security. What we're looking at right now is the possibility that Mexico will be able to increase its production to help to satisfy the energy needs of the United States. But at the same time as that's going on, the United States is going through a revolution in terms of energy on its own terms, which means that it needs our energy much less than it did before. This makes for a very, very interesting equation. Instead of thinking about the fact that the United States needs our oil, what we need to be thinking about is what are the enormous economic opportunities that will be presented to private sector and foreign actors in the Mexican oil sector over the next few years because of what might come about early in 2013 from an energy reform. Now that will raise all kinds of very interesting questions about levels of investment, about the creation of employment, etc. But most importantly, it will create a much closer tie between Mexico and the United States on oil issues than exists today. As many of the people who are watching this video know, it's been a highly controversial issue between Mexico and the United States ever since the 1930s, 1938, the nationalization of the oil industry in Mexico, when American companies used to dominate the sector here and were kicked out because of the nationalization. Ever since then, it's been a highly polemic and controversial issue where Mexican governments have claimed that the American corporations want to come in and steal Mexican oil, that the American government is only interested in one thing, getting their hands on Mexican oil. Of course, the truth is much more sophisticated and complex than that. But finally, we're reaching a point where we say, okay, if this is something that's mutually beneficial, if it's going to bring in investment, technology, know-how, expertise into the sector, maybe this is something that we should consider without worrying about whether it's American money and American corporations, or whether it's British, or whether it's French, or whether it's Russian, or Norwegian, or Brazilian. These are real opportunities right now. And the United States is going to play a role in that, but it's not going to be the only actor. And so I see this as being, in fact, one of the most exciting years in terms of energy politics in Mexico that's coming up right now, and something with potentially enormous consequences and implications for the bilateral relationship. The thing about being in Mexico is the first way that we look at an energy reform is we think of it as being essentially a political issue. We think that it's not really about energy, we think it's not really about the economy, but in fact it's all of those things. We know that, of course, it's a highly controversial and difficult political issue to deal with. It's highly sensitive for some of the reasons that we already talked about. But most importantly, I would say, the impact of the energy reform here in Mexico is really to add value to the Mexican economy. It will, if handled correctly, it will increase flows of finances to the Mexican government. It will create thousands and thousands of new jobs. It will bring in technology and expertise that don't exist here today. And ultimately will lead to an increase in the production of oil, and hopefully will guarantee the discovery of new reserves, both in the Gulf of Mexico in deep waters, as well as in some of the shallow waters that we're already drilling in, and on land. And I think this offers the prospect of a very, very rosy future for the Mexican economy. Now, beyond the economy, I think we have to move to society. You know, society has suffered in Mexico over the past 6 to 12 years because of the really disappointing numbers in terms of job creation. We think about the impact of that on salary levels, we think about the impact of that in terms of migration, we think about the impacts of that just in general development terms for the country. If we can generate thousands of jobs in the oil and gas sector, as they've done in the oil and gas sector in the United States and around the world over the past few years, just in the fracking business alone, i.e. shale gas, fracking business alone, around the world over the last 3 years, they've created 1 million jobs. Now imagine if we get a small percentage of that here in Mexico. That would be fabulous. Then we think about not just the direct exploration and production element of the energy business, but then the services that are connected to that and the dynamic spillover effect that has into the rest of the economy. You're talking about a knock-on effect that can generate not thousands but maybe tens or hundreds of thousands of jobs over the next few years in the Mexican economy, thereby making people's lives a lot better, thereby having a very positive impact upon Mexican society. Well, I think it's clear to most people who analyze the sector that the way things stand at the moment, that Pemex cannot do this on its own. To exploit shale gas, you require a lot of very cutting-edge technology which Pemex doesn't have access to. You need a model of a corporation which is small, flexible and highly mobile, because you drill down, you get the gas out of the ground, then you move on. Pemex is very bad at doing things like that. It's very good at exploiting oil and gas reserves in shallow waters where it stays for 15, 20 years. But to do something, drill, move on, it's not very good at that. Now, what I see as being the huge advantage of being right next door to the United States is that in the United States, the shale gas and shale oil industry has advanced faster than anywhere else in the world. They're the country that has the real expertise. They have the technology and they have the know-how and the firms that know how to do this. The great thing is that the companies that already operate on the US, or rather Texan side of the border, on the Eagle Ford formation, getting out shale gas and shale oil, will know exactly what kind of conditions they need to deal with when they cross over into Mexico, at least on the geological front. Maybe on the political and social front there'll be something different, which will be interesting. But we're going to see that these are companies which are real competitors. Now, what is particularly intriguing, I think, is to think about the alliances that can be struck between private Mexican firms and private American firms to come over into Mexico to do this. And there are a number of Mexican firms that are already considering that. One firm in particular that is already active on the US side of the border, which is sort of in the shale gas industry already. So the way that the United States has structured its shale oil and shale gas industries has been the success story of international energy for the past 3 years. And to bring some of that success to Mexico would be a benefit to the Mexican economy, to Mexican society, to the Mexican state, and of course to the private actors from both sides of the border. One other element that we need to talk about, and that's of course the environment. As many people will know, the shale gas industry is highly controversial in terms of its environmental impact. We have to be very careful here in Mexico that we have not just the right regulations, but the capacity to police those regulations to make sure that we don't see massive environmental degradation from the development of shale gas in this country, and perhaps even more spectacularly from the development of deep water exploration in the Gulf of Mexico. You know, as we've seen over the past few years, that's a highly risky business, and once you have an oil leak down there 3-4 kilometers under the ocean, it's very difficult to do anything about it. So we need to enact really the world's best standards in this, and we need to have authorities here in Mexico that have the capacity and the will to implement those regulations. Okay, so an energy partnership between Mexico and the United States, between Mexico, the United States and Canada is an intriguing prospect. And it's intriguing for one very good reason, which is that the price of energy in North America is going to be amongst the lowest prices in the world. Right now we see that the price of natural gas in the United States, and Mexico's price for natural gas is directly linked to that, is in fact the lowest in the world right now. That's incredible. That gives us an enormous potential in terms of economic growth and competitiveness. Now, logic would suggest that it makes perfect sense for us to fully integrate our energy markets in the same way that we're fully integrating our economies through the NAFTA process. But because of the political and social issues that we've already talked about, we've held back from that. So I wouldn't say that we're going to move 100% towards an energy partnership in North America that opens up everything. But I think we are going to see an energy partnership that leads towards progressive, gradual integration of electricity networks, of pipeline networks, of exports and imports of gas and oil across the 3 countries of North America. And the reason why is because it makes perfect economic sense to do that. If we look at the way in which energy markets are structured, they don't necessarily follow national lines. In fact, energy markets cross borders. Think about the way in which Baja California Norte is integrated into the California electricity network. Think about the exchanges of electricity, of oil and gas between Canada and the United States that go north-south as opposed to east-west. That's something that's very, very exciting. And once we think about an integrated energy market in North America, why not begin to think about extending that southwards into Central America? Central America is an area of the world which has suffered greatly from energy poverty. Until recently, there was no natural gas supply in Central America. It's just getting there right now. They are currently undergoing a process of integrating their electricity grids. Mexico and the rest of North America should be part of that. My feeling is that, and remember, I'm relatively optimistic on these things. Many of my Mexican colleagues who are more pessimistic say, Duncan, you know, what have you been smoking? So my feeling is this. In 10 years' time, we're looking at an energy reality between Mexico and the United States where we have much more open exchanges of oil, gas, electrons, etc. I think we're going to see much higher levels of investment from the United States and Mexico, but not just from the United States, from all countries around the world. We need to have a much more open and accepting system here to really attract foreign direct investment into the sector, because it's what we desperately need. We've been blessed in this country with enormous natural resources. We've used those, but we haven't used them particularly well. The future for Mexican energy is incredibly bright, but we need to have cooperation and partnerships with all kinds of countries. But the United States is our biggest and most important economic partner, and our most important political relationship. It makes sense for us to invest in that relationship into the future. So I see that in fact we're going to see a much bigger, much more intense and much more mutually beneficial relationship 10 years from now. Well, it's a very interesting question, because a lot of university students think, well, I'm going to study this stuff and eventually I'm going to go on and work in it, and that's where I'll make my contribution. At the level of universities, I would say that one of the most important things that can be done is the exchange of information between students and, of course, faculty. But students, you know, have that natural link between them. And I think to help to break some of the myths about Mexican energy in the United States and some of the myths about US energy sector in Mexico is one of the best things that can happen. So to increase understanding. Secondly, it's at universities like ITAM, like Stanford, for example, where networking really begins in your life. And the connections that you make at this point in your life will continue throughout your professional careers afterwards. You know, we think about possibly going to do a master's degree, maybe a PhD afterwards, but more importantly, you know, the people that I come across here at ITAM that I've had the privilege to teach over the years that I've been here are people who go on to have a great deal of importance in the energy sector. Those connections will be invaluable in 5-10 years' time as young students or people who are young now go on and develop their professional careers. So building up understanding, building up networks is really what matters. And beyond that, to make sure that those networks don't die. So once you leave the university, once you get your degree, to participate in some kind of networking activity. It's one of the things that we're working on right now at ITAM. We're trying to create a network of young energy professionals in Mexico. And the idea for that would be to bring all of those people in Mexico together for a brighter energy future. Why not think about that on a bilateral basis as well, which is exactly what US-Mexico Focus is trying to do.